How will President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs impact the average American? Worldwide tariffs on steel and aluminum are already in place, plus reciprocal tariffs on all imports are set to take effect in less than 2 weeks. These will have both short and long-term effects on American consumers, but those effects won't take place in a vacuum. Trump's domestic oil production plan, his deregulation efforts, and potential tax cuts also need to be considered to estimate the full impact of the 47th president's policies. Here to examine that impact is Vance Ginn, former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget, and Michael Busler, professor of finance at Stockton University. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vance, let's start with you. How will Trump's tariffs impact American families in both the short and the long term?
Well, it's an interesting thing to look at right now because, during the last 4 years, we had this affordability crisis of too much inflation, too much government spending, and money printing by the Fed. And there was a big election in November that says we want a different direction. We want to move toward more affordable things. And what Trump is doing here with tariffs is raising taxes on Americans for particular goods or even across the board. And so, what I think we would see, at least initially, is higher prices, especially if they go into effect. Right now, we're seeing a lot of uncertainty because of the on again, off again tariffs that are in place versus Canada or on Canada and Mexico and possibly China and other countries. And so I think initially what we will see is less investment in the economy, higher prices for certain goods, maybe building a house if you're using lumber. And then longer term, let's see what happens. If there's reciprocal trade where they get down to zero, that's one thing. If we have higher tariffs on everything, that's a whole different picture. So it's interesting to see what happens to Americans.
And Michael, same question for you. How will Trump's tariffs affect American families in the short and the long term?
So, for the most part, I agree with Vance. And let me start off by saying I'm a free market economist. If it was up to me, we would have zero tariffs on everything. If we do, that benefits both partners in trade. However, most governments have decided, for whatever reason, we should have at least some tariffs on products. Most countries say, well, we should have a 2.5% tariff. So the US places a 2.5% tariff. Unfortunately, our trading partners didn't do that. In China, for instance, they make automobile parts, import them into the US. We charge 2.5% tariff. Anything we produce here and sell in China, automobile market, they charge a 25% tariff. For whatever reason, a 50% tariff on Corvettes. The European Union, we allow them to sell automobiles made in Germany, Italy, France, charge a 2.5% tariff. They charge us a 10% tariff, and then they have this value added tax calculation, which actually makes it worse. The result is millions of their cars are here in the US. Walk around Paris or Munich or Rome, you don't see one Chevrolet and one Ford. So what's happening is we're importing a lot of products and we're paying for that. So our money flows out of the country. Other countries are not buying very much of our products because they place such a high tariff on it. So very little of their money flows into the country. That leads to a significant negative balance of trade. That has allowed countries like China, for instance, to become a world power because of this. So Trump went in and he said, look, I just want this to be fair. If we're charging 2.5%, you should charge 2.5%. We want reciprocal tariffs. Everybody
Vance, I want to
charges
get your
the
response
same
to
once it
that.
gets
I
there.
know that you too, Vance, support free trade. Those are shared values that you have with Michael. But how do you contextualize that in what Michael's talking about and what Trump might call the need for fair trade?
Well, I think that fair trade really goes to the eyes of the beholder. Who is determining what is fair versus others? I mean, I think what would not be fair if we have reciprocal trade agreements and raising prices, especially on those that are low income Americans and they can't afford to put food on the table or pay for a house and other things because of the higher tariffs that are in place. I don't see that as being fair. And so at the end of the day, what I think is important is to make sure that we have the least amount of trade barriers in place. And I think ultimately what Trump would like to do is see all those reciprocal tariffs go to zero. But even during the first Trump administration, which I was in, we didn't see China and other countries change their trade practices. it's very difficult for them to want to do that, especially in China where you have a communist party. They don't really care as much about their people and their economy in that sense, where they want to affect what's going on in America. And so what I would like to see America do instead is to lower the cost of doing business at home. That will make us much more competitive with China, lowering the corporate income taxes, deregulating, lowering government spending and debt and all that stuff, instead of trying to use tariffs as a tool, which really is just raising taxes on Americans. And so ultimately, when you want to do something that's beneficial to Americans, you typically don't raise taxes on them to do so.
So let's get into the specifics of this, Michael. Who in the U.S. will benefit from Trump's tariffs on foreign goods, and who will suffer? Because there's a lot of tariffs that are going to be put into place here.
Well, so in the short term, there will be some upward pressure on price, and whenever Vance is right, whenever there's any upward pressure on price, it's a tax on consumption, and that's a regressive tax, and it tends to hurt lower income people the most in the short term. However, these tariffs are primarily a negotiating tool, particularly with countries like China, with Mexico and Canada. Canada cannot afford to have a 25% tariff placed on their products. Why? They have a little over a $2 trillion economy, about 18%, almost 400 billion of their output gets sold to the US. If we put a 25% tariff and it knocks that from 400 down to 300, that's 5% of their GDP. They'll go into a recession. Worse yet, they say, well, you put a tariff on us, we'll put one on you. We sell mostly consumer products to them, and their consumers will end up paying the higher prices. They end up with a recession and more inflation. These are primarily negotiating tools. President Trump said, I don't want to wait and take years for this. I want everybody to come to the table quickly. A business person knows if you want to bring somebody to the table, you create a sense of urgency. And that's exactly what he did. Mexico is already working with us to avoid the tariff. Eventually, I believe all countries will do that, and we'll end up with reciprocal tariffs. Everybody pays the same, probably in the 2% range. And that's the overall goal, to offset any inflationary impacts, exactly what Vance said. Deregulate, make it easier for business, decrease energy prices, which account for 7% of the CPI. So he'll be able to offset, he believes, any inflationary short-term impact from tariffs by lowering the cost to do business and the cost of energy.
Now, one of the things about tariffs is, it's international trade. It occurs at a massive scale. We're talking trillions of dollars, billions of dollars. And with Trump's tariffs, these are reciprocal tariffs levied on any country that already has tariffs on the U.S. So it's like this kind of high-level economic thing we're talking about. But I want to make sure we bring it back down home for, the average American sitting there watching this show right now. Vance, let's take cars, for example. Will they become more expensive due to higher tariffs on steel, which in fact are already in place?
Short answer is yes. And I think, even Trump acknowledged this recently, like in the short run, we're probably going to feel some pain. And then longer run, we'll see what happens. And that's where I'm kind of concerned about this, is that Americans will feel pain from the higher tariffs now. And if we don't end up in a place, as I mentioned before, that we have lower tariffs to 2%, that'd be great. Look, I mean, if we can get to reciprocal tariffs at 2%, I'm for that, or ultimately to zero. But I think what ends up happening, though, in kind of the real world, is that we see tariffs lead to trade wars. And then you have back and forth between the tariffs that are going to happen. And that's what concerns me for Americans, is what is going to be the price of a car, as you pointed out, or buying a home. And all these things are influenced because we do live in a global marketplace. And while it would be great if America produced everything that we wanted, that's not the way that our system works today. And I would argue we're better off from having trade with many other countries. And so one other thing I would just point out here is that I'm also for something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, that was done probably badly by Obama back in the day. But why not have negotiations of free trade with our allies to allow for more trade with them compared with places like China? I think that would be a much better direction for us to go.
Yeah, and you mentioned China. Speaking of that, Michael, I mean, Trump has already levied 20% tariffs on China. China is not looking to back down here. They're a massive they're a massive trade partner, a massive exporter. Where is that going, do you think? I mean, that could, yeah, that could be an escalation significantly from what we saw in Trump's first term.
So, a couple things overall. All of these countries need us more than we need them. So, when we bring them to the negotiating table, I feel confident, and I hope I'm right, that we end up with very fair trade agreements where there's 0 or 2.5%. I'm in the same boat Vance is in. Now, with China, things are a little different. Why? We make a lot of vital products in China, and that could cause problems. I recall during the pandemic, everybody had to wear a mask. So masks were 30, 40 cents. Everybody had to wear a mask. All the companies made them in China. We had a shipload of hundreds of millions of masks on the way over here. China said, wait a minute, we're having a problem over here too. Turn that ship around, bring it back to China. We had a shortage of masks, drove the price of masks temporarily, at least, up to $5. So there are certain vital products that we can't continue to make in China. Steel and aluminum are vital to our national security. Even if we have to pay a little bit more to revitalize our steel industry, many believe, and I would agree, that in the long run, that puts us in a more secure position so that if we ever get into another war, we have enough steel and aluminum to go forward. China also cheats. They revalue their currency every time we put a tariff on, so it kind of negates the effect of it. If China was playing fairly with this, and I hope the rest of the world will play fairly with this, we'll end up with little or no tariffs on anybody. Trump doesn't want this to take years to resolve. He wants to create a sense of urgency so everybody comes to the table immediately and we fix this once and for all. Same thing as doing with government spending. We don't want to take years to redo this. We'll bring in the smartest guy we know. We'll tell him to cut government spending and we'll get it down immediately, not over a 4 or 5 year period.
Vance, foreign investment in the US under Trump has already increased by trillions. How much of that is related to Trump's tariff policy?
Um, there's probably something to do with that, given where how much is it going to cost you to do business, or what's going to be the influence of the tariffs. But it also is important to understand too that whenever we're importing more than we export, a so-called trade deficit, a current account deficit, there also is an influx of capital surplus that comes in by foreign investments from those countries. Those dollars don't just sit idly by in China or somewhere else. They send those back, paying for our deficits and debt and other types of capital investments that go throughout our economy. And many of those are actually by American companies who are in China today. And so this is something else that needs to be accounted for, is that if we do have less trade, and that's the direction we want to go, we're probably also going to pay higher prices for interest rates and for paying for our national debt. And if the Federal Reserve prints that money, too much money chasing too few goods, we're going to have more inflation, which hurts the economy as well. And so I really hope that we can get to a situation that we understand that trade is important for us. We trade with people every day because we don't want I don't like to put up a new ceiling fan, for example, in my house. I'd rather pay for someone to do that. There's a lot of trade that goes on every single day. And some of that does happen from different countries. And we need to make sure that we also realize that we're helping people around the globe, not just in America, be more prosperous. And I think that is very important for people here on Earth.
But and this is for you, Michael. We're helping other countries. This is a policy. We have these lower tariffs to kind of boost other economies, especially after World War II. But to what extent does it hurt America? I mean, at this point, what would it say America be like if we hadn't done that?
So the whole thrust of President Trump's policies are we have to put America first. We've been very nice since World War II, especially very nice to everybody in the world as they take advantage of us. You initially asked the question about foreign investment. Well, we took a lesson from India. India places a 100% tariff on motorcycles. Harley Davidson says we sell a lot of motorcycles in India. So what do we have to do? We go over to India and we build a plant in India to avoid the tariffs. Trump said, well, that seems like a good plan. So we raised the taxes here, we raised the tariffs on foreign countries. So what do? Honda says, I'm not going to build my plant in Mexico. I'm going to build my plant in Indiana. Other companies, AI companies, are looking at putting their investments here in the US to avoid some of those tariffs. So, one of the positive impacts of the tariffs, manufacturing will be brought back to the US. That's beneficial to us in the long run. Now, somebody would say, yeah, but that means we'll pay higher prices, and that's true. So if we have to pay a little higher prices now to get this whole thing in balance, most people, I think, would agree, I hope, that that's probably the best way to go.
And just in closing here, Vance, with maybe 30 seconds, Michael's now talking about the long range impact of all these tariffs and Trump's policies. How do you expect President Trump's tariff policy to play out for American consumers when put in the context of his other economic policies?
Well, I should start with I'm really excited about the extension and making permanent the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Trump tax cuts of 2017. I think that's going to be a big part of this. The energy permitting and abundance of energy across the country is what we need again. That will help lower prices. And the deregulation that's happening under Doge and Elon Musk, and hopefully what Congress will cement these into law, I think are very powerful steps in the right direction. I just think that tariffs are going to be a drag on what that economic growth will be. And hopefully it ends up being a more of a way to get us to more free trade in the longer run. I'm just a little bit, I'm just skeptical that that will be the case. And so I'm glad to be proven wrong. I hope that will be the case. But let's see what happens. And I hope there'll be more focus on the pro-growth measures versus the tariffs here in the short run and the long run.
Well, there's certainly going to be a lot to follow when these tariffs on almost every country around the world go into place on April 2nd, just less than 2 weeks away. Vance Ginn, former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget, and Michael Busler, professor of finance at Stockton University, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.